So I'm Jake Lee. I'm gonna take you on a tour. I'm the marketing guy here at Carton. We start off the tour here with a little history of the building. So this room up to that archway that tells you what we do at Carton Brewing is all part of the original structure.
Craft beer. It's a phrase that's thrown around a lot today. From craft bars to craft breweries, the alternative to big beer companies has become one of the world's largest up-and-coming industries. In just a few short years, hundreds of craft breweries have popped up across the nation. But what is it exactly? Where did this huge industry boom come from, and where is it headed? And most importantly, what even is beer, and what makes it craft?
A whole lot of water in beer. So malted barley, malted meaning that it's taken, dried, wet, it germinates, and then it's dried again. Sometimes it's left in that state, sometimes it's put into a powder or a syrup form. It's further extracted down. Beyond that, there's maybe some grain used for color or nose or odor, or something to give it a special quality. Then there's the hops. Hops are a bittering agent, and they also are a preservative, but also give it a kind of the scent that you would think for a beer, from a beer. It's like in its form that you add it to a beer, it's flowery, but once it gets mixed in with all the rest of the ingredients, it kind of adds a nice aroma to the beer. That then is pretty much cooked up. Process wise, final ingredient then after you've made your beer is yeast, which is really the kind of the catalyst to bring it all together. That's where the real science of the beer takes place. You get from yeast, you get carbonation, you get alcohol, and all that fuel you put in on the front from the malted barley and anything else you add, that's what the yeast use to make the beer. So
People have been brewing and producing beer for centuries. Scientists have found indications that it was brewed as far back as 7,000 years ago by the ancient Mesopotamians. Most scholars suspect beer was first discovered by accident when wild yeasts caused cereal grains to ferment, and ancient peoples found that it produced a palatable beverage. Beer soon became a staple part of many ancient societies' diets, with ancient Egyptians even levying beer allowances to workers since it was so high in nutrients. It also became so prevalent because the brew process involved boiling, which removed dangerous pathogens often found in well water. Many argue that the discovery of fermentation in beer allowed nomadic tribes to begin building settlements and eventually whole societies. From then all the way to the Industrial Revolution, beer remained a local homebrewed beverage, with tastes and styles that grew from the regions it was produced in. This practice is what led to the hundreds of beer styles we enjoy today. The list of styles is formidable and varied, and really too long to list.
IPAs, session hop session ales, regular session ales, golden lagers, milk stouts, session stouts,
double IPA, stouts, porters, gozas, sours.
Like I said, the list goes on and on. With the amount of beer styles out there, it can get confusing as to which tastes like what, and what it is exactly that differentiates one beer from another.
So I know that beer types are I mean, beer's been around for thousands of years, right? I mean, it came from a mistake, or to get down to knowing the classifications and behind every different beer type. You really need to be a student of brewing beer, or I think Zymergy is the scientific name for the process of brewing.
Well, there's the traits that differentiate beers, or there could be alcohol content, obviously, hop content. A lot of beers are a lot more hoppy, especially IPAs and double IPAs. Sourness, thickness. You notice a lot of beers that are poured on nitro have like a nice creamy texture, whereas like opposed to like a Bud Light, which is almost like water. So it's just whole spectrum.
I think it starts before that. I think beers are differentiated before what's in the glass.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean before what you pick up on in the glass, because you could even have beer that's stated to be the same style but tastes very different to you, and for you to not necessarily be able to discern that is exactly what they were going for, that's exactly the profile in this beer. I would say the recipe is, everything starts with there, everything starts with the malt bill, because you can have such a formulaic response to what you're going for, but that might be very different from what people pick up on.
What are traits that differentiate one beer from another? Hoppiness, texture, alcohol percentage, SRM, ABV, all works.
But so obviously there, the big classifications. There's ales and there's lagers, which have to do with the way the different yeasts you use. Some are more active at a higher temperature, which are I think the ale yeasts. They're called top fermenting yeasts, and then some are happier at a lower temperature, or the bottom fermenting yeasts, I think as they're called, which would be lagers. So the kind of term lagering means to take your beer, be it in a keg or in the older days, a cask or something, and put it in a root cellar or somewhere cold where you have steady, cooler temperature, maybe in the 50s, and let it lager or age out so it ferments there. And the yeast in lager are happier in the colder temperatures, whereas an ale is probably better suited for summertime. But you don't want it out in the blazing sun. That you want to tuck it away, again, quiet, dark place. So as far as getting into all the classifications, my goodness, you really have to be a student of brewing.
You can make things that don't follow traditional guidelines. So I think traits aren't as specific as they once were. Even just New England IPA being a sign of that. I mean, people would more attribute hazy beers to Germans as they would, a New England brewer in that sense up until late. So I think traits are almost an aftermath if you're not following traditional methods in that sense.
So with all the beer styles that exist, one might wonder how for decades Americans only had access to golden pilsners and ales. One word: prohibition. On January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment took effect in the United States. The production and consumption of alcohol had become illegal in the country. Breweries and distilleries alike closed their doors across the nation, and for the first time in history, the United States was a dry country. During this period, many breweries, rather than close their doors, began producing various other products. Yuengling Brewery, for example, produced ice cream and actually opened dance halls in Philadelphia and New York City. This period would last until 1933, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed an amendment to the Volstead Act, which led to the repealing of the 18th Amendment on December 5, 1933. After that dark 13-year period, only a handful of breweries were able to reopen. Prohibition and the subsequent rediscovering of beer led to a period I like to call the Age of Golden Beers. Companies like Coors, Anheuser-Busch, and Miller Brewing Company grew to form monopolies that dominated the beer market in the United States for decades. With no competition and high tariffs on imported beer, the monopolies stood as the main source of beer for Americans. But all of that began to change in the 1970s. On August 25, 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed into law a bill called H.R. 1337. This bill removed restrictions and regulations that previously forbade private citizens from brewing beer in their own homes. The nation was hooked. That same year, Charlie Papazian, referred to by many as, quote, the father of homebrewing, founded the American Homebrewers Association, and a year later also founded the Association of Brewers. Both associations still exist in some form, with Papazian as president up until 2016. The simplicity and artisanal intrigue attracted curious beer drinkers looking to try their hand at creating beverages that, thus far, they had only been able to buy from the store. The freedom to create and experiment with styles and flavors would eventually propel the hobby to new and greater heights. But at its core, it was still just about brewing great beer to share with friends and family.
Homebrewing is one of those like gadget, Mr. Gadget or Inspector Gadget things that when I was younger and I would think about things to do to kind of, you know, have fun. And at the time you have a lot of friends, you're drinking beer a lot anyway. Some people are more or less into cooking fancy meals, or other people like to go out and take you to nice restaurants. I like to cook too, but you know, I don't know, it wasn't like a rival thing, but it was more or less looking for something different.
Have I ever homebrewed? No. Unfortunately, I have not. It's been something I've been looking into recently, but haven't gotten into it.
Something that you would aspire to do good at and make individual. You know, something that fits, you know, what you like and what other people would like. So in the beginning it was kind of like, you know, you pick a recipe, and I would think, all right, what can I do to make this not the recipe, but more mine? You know, what can I put in it? And so I think just that flexibility to make it individualized, and to say what you're drinking I made from scratch, pretty much, you know.
Yeah, I did homebrew one time. My father actually bought me a kit when I was 22, and I really tried to make a goza, and it was really hard, and it came out terrible. And to that day, I have not homebrewed, but I'm going to pick it up again one day.
Sparking my interest in homebrewing came from learning that essentially every brewery, every master brewer, everyone that maybe owns $1 billion company or a startup stems from someone in their basement or their garage, or they got together with their friends and either wanted to do something cool, make something new, recreate something they enjoyed, or just drink at a cheaper overall cost. I think is what kind of got me into it, in the sense that you can put your own stamp on something. I've always had the kind of thrill in my mind of creating and manipulating flavors and working on something with my own touch, so I think that's part of it, is that you get to, like a chef, construct a flavor profile, but there's also the hands-on, what happens when you add this ingredient at this time and this temperature, and you gotta have your own variables that you put in.
This room we really just use for our dry goods storage. If you look in that pallet there, that's some of our grains, mostly malted barley that we'll extract sugars from to ferment to make the alcohol in the beer. Aside from that,
Well, Eric said it best. All of these breweries, both large and small, started with passionate people brewing what they liked in their basements and garages. The concept and application of craft beer was wholly born from homebrewing and experimenting with flavors and styles outside of the norm. In just a decade, the number of craft breweries in New Jersey alone has jumped from around 10 to over 90 today. Carton Brewery, for example, has grown from a garage project and later a 7-barrel system into a 15-barrel system with plans to migrate into a much larger facility in the new year. To answer your next question, a barrel is a unit of measurement for beer. 1 barrel of beer is approximately 31 gallons, so you can do the math. The interest in the industry and craft has exploded as well. This then begs the question, where is the industry going?
here, basically we're coming out of our mill, coming up through that pipe that says carton. Follow that up, drop into the mash tun here. The mash tun functions sort of like a giant tea strainer, so basically dropping grains in there with some hot water is taking the sugars out, making a sugar water called wort. The wort is what we use as the base for the beer. The wort's going to come out of that mash tun.
So yeah, my bar is considered a gastropub, always different craft beer, and when I first started working there I thought, all right, we'll probably get a younger clientele, or at least 20s people that are into this kind of style. But I've actually been shocked by who is in there every day, because there are a good amount of younger guys that get into it, but it's a whole age spectrum. I have older women coming in and getting gozas, I have old men who love a dark stout, middle-aged families coming in, and dads are getting Carton Canyon and, you know, good lagers. It's crazy. Everybody's enjoying the beer.
So let's go around to our cellar.
Currently, the industry is pretty focused on overly hopped beers. New England IPAs in particular, which is a hazy juice bomb that in some cases resembles orange juice more than it does beers. And I personally am not the largest fan of that style.
I wouldn't change anything about how the industry is expanding. I think there's a few things that they're eventually going to have to change because they think they're silly at the time. One of the things eventually will change is when you go into craft breweries right now, you're legally required to get a tour, which is, don't get me wrong, awesome. But I feel like eventually it will become such commonplace that that won't become a thing anymore. Or right now in craft breweries, you're allowed to bring dogs in, which, again, awesome. But eventually someone's going to have some health code issues with that.
Up.
Yeah.
It's growing tremendously. ABC laws are ridiculous in New Jersey. There's so many things limiting craft breweries and doing that, but honestly, craft beer is going to take over the world. One state at a time. It already is. You can't stop it. You can't stop what people want.
So we call this our cellar even though we're not underground. This is just where we do the cold processing. We come into fermentation, one of our common fermenters here, basically a fermenter with a cone-shaped bottom. The wort sits in there for about 2 to 3 weeks with the yeast feeding on the sugars, creating alcohol and CO2. We have our beer.
While I can appreciate it and really enjoy some of them, I think it is more of a fad than it is something here, built to last. And while some people do it very well, and while some versions of this style I think will be around for a while, I don't see it as something that necessarily will, replace any of the head honchos in the beer world, and that will necessarily be something that stays. I think overly bitter, overly hopped beers will kind of reach that climax. I think they've kind of hit that peak where they're oversaturated now at this point, where everyone's trying to make a hazy beer, a hazy IPA that's citra hopped, mosaic hopped, and that the farther you go in that direction, the more people are going to probably pull back from that palate, I think.
At the end, we would be taking our still active beer out of our fermenter, going into one of these guys here. This is called a pen, the one below is called a firkin, just difference in size. We're gonna throw it in there. Depending on the beer, we might add a little bit of priming sugar. Priming sugar is stuff that the yeast would feed off of, just give it a little bit of carbonation.
Craft beer, right, is kind of more or less, I don't know, people say it's like a, the yuppie thing or whatever you want to call it. I love it. I think if it's a fad, I'm happy with it being a fad, and I hope it sticks around for a while. Unfortunately, I think, just the success and costs and things like that may have a role in how, which survive and which don't. I'm sure there'll be some players that show up on top, but I don't want to look at it as like business. It's more or less a pretty cool time if you like beer, and especially if you like brewing beer, to go and see how these guys do it. And I think I like the kind of on display part of it. They have their, most of the time the smaller ones will have tours where you see the brewing vessels and talk to the brewers, and they're more than happy to talk to you about what they do. I've been to a number of events where I've gotten to meet a lot of different brewers, and everybody's in it for a different reason, and it's cool. It's a on one hand, you maybe don't want to have too much of it, but if it's a business and you treat it that way, if that's what you want to do, I think it's a great thing, and I'm happy to see it.
Well, I kind of covered the rest of it, so cool. That'll about do it. Great. Perfect. I got the pinky out on camera too, so that works.
You gotta relax and have a homebrew.
Yep.
And don't worry.
Just like Papazian said, right?
Mm-hmm.